Welcome to True or False. I'm your host, Jason A. Kessler, and today I want to talk about Israel. Well, I don't want to talk about Israel. That's like wanting a prostate exam. It's uncomfortable, and the results can be scary. But that's the problem. Somewhere along the way, the whole topic of Israel became super controversial and impossible to talk about, which just makes it easier for misinformation to hijack the narrative and insert itself where it doesn't belong. Just like my doctor's lubricated gloved finger. But that's why I have to talk about Israel. It's like the emperor's new clothes. That old story about two con artists who promise the emperor they'll make him an outfit using cloth that's invisible to people who are stupid. The emperor doesn't want to look stupid, so he pretends that he sees the outfit and walks around totally naked. And all his top advisors don't want to look stupid, so they pretend they don't see all the emperor's bits and pieces flopping around in front of them. Same with all the people in the land, except one little kid who finally yells out the truth that the emperor's not wearing any clothes. I always loved that story, and I always imagined that I wouldn't go along with the crowd. I'd call out the naked truth, just like that little kid. And that's what I'm doing now, talking about Israel. So let's start with a super sketchy narrative that I've been hearing more and more lately. It goes something like this. Israel is a white colonial state oppressing the indigenous brown Palestinian population. It was only created because of the Holocaust, when Western countries felt bad for the Jews and gave them a bunch of stolen Palestinian land. European Jews flocked to Israel in droves, kicked out the Palestinians by force, and Israel was born. Maybe that sounds familiar, maybe not, but if you accept that version, then it's easy to make you think of Israel as the evil, racist, colonial oppressor. And if it were true, trust me, I'd be Israel's biggest critic. But it's not true. It's like when my parents told me I was allergic to dogs, so I would stop asking them for a puppy. It's just deceptive propaganda. The whole point is to demonize and delegitimize Israel, which, in my opinion, only takes us further away from actual peace. So here's what I want to do. Let's focus on two simple facts that totally undermine the idea of Israel as a white colonial oppressor. One, Jews have been living in Israel continuously for thousands of years. And two, most Jews in Israel aren't white and aren't from Europe. Surprised? If so, then I hope I have your attention. I'm going to spend the rest of this episode unpacking those two simple facts in detail, so you don't have to take my word for it that the emperor is naked. You'll see it for yourself. And once you see it, you can't really unsee it. Now, there's a lot to get through, and this is going to be a long one, but stick with me. This stuff's important. We'll bring in some animation to make it a little more fun, and I'll try to get through it as fast as I can. Ready? It all starts around 2,000 years ago when Rome destroyed the Jewish kingdom in Israel and built a giant arch to brag about it like a bunch of douchebags. Now, here's the part people miss. Sure, tons of Jews were enslaved or exiled, but not all of them. Jews were still the main people living in the area, even after the Romans renamed it Syria Palestina, or Palestine, in another douchey move to troll the Jews and erase their history. Jews were the majority all the way up to the 5th century when Christians finally started to outnumber them under Byzantine rule, and Jews were banned from Jerusalem except on one day a year. This is also when Emperor Constantine built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, leading to centuries of people wondering, what the heck is a sepulchre? Okay, fine, it's a small tomb like the one Jesus was placed in after he was crucified. Later, in the 7th century, Arab forces conquered Palestine, and Jews survived as a minority under a bunch of Muslim dynasties. Some of the rulers were mean to the Jews, some of them were cool. Over the next few hundred years, Arabs gradually became the majority population, and Islam the majority religion. During this time, Jews got permission to live in Jerusalem again, and this is probably when the Jewish quarter became a thing. This is also when the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque were built on the ruins of the Jewish temple, turning the Temple Mount into an Islamic holy site where Jews were banned from worshipping. The Jews were like, it's cool, we'll just pray over here at this crumbling wall. This gets us all the way to the Crusades in 1099, when the Jews and Muslims of Palestine fought side by side against the Christian invaders. Jews and Muslims were massacred and sold into slavery, but still, small Jewish communities survived, scattered around Palestine, including in Ashkelon, Ramleh, Caesarea, Tiberias, and Akko. In 1260, after Egyptian forces conquered the area, the Jewish community was reinforced by several waves of Jewish immigration from Europe, North Africa, and Syria, and by the 1300s, the Jewish population of Jerusalem was making a comeback. Then came the Ottoman Empire that conquered Palestine in 1517 and occupied it for the next 400 years. At the start of Ottoman rule, the Jews of Palestine were mainly in Jerusalem, Nablus, Hebron, Gaza, Safed, and small villages in the Galilee, and included Jews who had never left the land and Jewish migrants who returned to the land from all over. We're now only around 400 years before the Holocaust, and you can see that there were Jews in Palestine the whole time. Sometimes a bunch of them were massacred and expelled from Palestine. Sometimes they were allowed to come back, often after getting massacred and expelled from some other place. But all along, there were always Jews in Palestine. And remember when I said most Jews in Israel aren't white and aren't European? Well, you can see how Jews were scattered all over, and after centuries of living in different parts of the world and mixing a bit with the local populations, different Jewish communities developed different customs and culture and skin color. Ashkenazi Jews are the ones who settled in Europe. And honestly, I'm not a huge fan of calling them white, especially since so much European anti-Semitism, including, the whole Nazi thing, was based on the fact that Jews aren't white. But still, over the years, enough Ashkenazi Jews got their groove on with enough Europeans that they definitely have whiter skin than non-Ashkenazi Jews. So that's really who we're talking about when we talk about white European Jews. But then there's also Mizrahi Jews, who lived in Middle Eastern and North African countries like Iraq, Egypt, Sudan, Tunisia, Syria, and Morocco, and of course also stuck around in Palestine. And there's Sephardi Jews who ended up in Spain and Portugal for centuries until the Spanish Inquisition sent them scattering. Yemenite Jews forged their own distinct culture in Yemen, Persian Jews in Iran. You get the point. Non-European Jewish communities are what you might refer to as people of color. And in case you were wondering, yes, DNA studies have confirmed that these Jewish communities in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East can all trace their genetic ancestry back to a shared Middle Eastern origin. By the 1500s, the Jewish community of Palestine was already a bit of a melting pot from waves of Jews returning from all over the world. And today, more than half the Jews of Israel have non-European ancestry. I once visited Israel with a friend from Texas who wasn't Jewish. Just looking around, she was shocked by how many people didn't look white. She had an image of what a Jew looked like based on most American Jews. And 5 minutes on a beach in Tel Aviv blew her mind. 5 minutes on a beach in Tel Aviv destroys the white colonial racist oppressor myth. That's the crazy thing. The truth is literally staring us in the face. But that doesn't stop the misinformation machine. Anyway, where were we? 1517, Ottoman Empire, the cycle continued. In the 1600s, after 100,000 Jews were massacred in Ukraine, a whole bunch of the survivors fled to Palestine. In the early 1700s, even more Ashkenazi Jews arrived, but then the Ottomans kicked them all out of Jerusalem and only allowed non-European Jews to stay. In 1742, Jews from Morocco and Italy settled in Jerusalem. In 1777, Jews from Lithuania settled in Tiberias. In the 1800s, waves of Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardi Jews, Mizrahi Jews, and Yemenite Jews all flocked to Palestine. By 1890, Jews were the majority in Jerusalem, and they couldn't all fit in the old Jewish quarter, so they built new neighborhoods outside the walls of the old city. All around the country, Jews built a bunch of brand new towns like Rosh Pinna and Petah Tikva without stealing land or kicking people out of their homes. In 1909, a group of Jews decided to build a modern city on 60 plots of land that they purchased near Jaffa. This would eventually become Tel Aviv. Then came World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Palestine was occupied by British forces, and this starts the period known as the British Mandate. Now, the British promised both the Arabs and the Jews of Palestine that they would each get the opportunity to have independence and self-rule. But under British occupation, things got messy and tense. Everyone was mad at everyone, violence broke out between Arabs and Jews each launched attacks against the British. Finally, in 1947, after slogging through World War II, the British were like, fine, we'll leave Palestine. And with the blessing of the UN, they presented a partition plan which would create an independent Arab state for the 1.2 million Arabs in Palestine and an independent Jewish state for the 630,000 Jews in Palestine. The Jewish leaders were like, yeah, let's do it. But the Arab leaders said no, and along with the armies of 5 neighboring Arab countries, they waged war against the brand new Jewish country of Israel. In many ways, that war never really ended. It's the argument they're still arguing. And since then, it's gotten even messier, with shifting borders, massive migration of Jews to the region, wartime atrocities committed by both sides, Palestinian terrorism, Jewish settlements, and ongoing military occupation. and so on. I know, it's a lot, and that's really just the backstory. But hopefully now you see why it's deceptive to call Israel a white European colonial state. The Holocaust isn't the beginning of the story, not even close. It's just the latest chapter of the longest chase scene in history, with the Jews just trying to survive the destruction of their kingdom more than 2,000 years ago. And now you also understand how Jews in Israel are a melting pot of cultures, and that a majority of them have non-European, non-white ancestry. But look, even if we can weed out all the misinformation, the conflict is still super complicated, and neither side is perfect or blameless. You should form whatever opinion you want about the actual issues. Criticize Israeli policies, push for peace in the way you think is right. There's room for lots of disagreement, but just make sure your opinion is still your opinion, even after you learn the real facts. Sadly, the loudest voices aren't always after the truth. We can't wait for other people to admit that the emperor looks naked. It's up to us to stay informed and speak up, and then maybe, just maybe, someday, there will be peace.